Okay, thank you so much for coming today. I'm so happy to be able to be here. I think I've come to Meadow Lake 3 or 4 times now, and I just love coming to this community. I have never experienced a more beautiful drive than coming into Meadow Lake. It is by far the most beautiful country in the entire province, and I just love coming here. And the people are beautiful, and you're so welcoming, and I am just really honored to be here today. I wanted to add a little bit into my introduction. I want to speak today about the lasting impacts of trauma and abuse, and what that does to us, what it does to our brains, what it does to our souls, what it does to our bodies, and how it can be passed down to the next generation. So I want to talk a little bit today, not only from a place of knowledge, but from a place of experience, because I myself, like many of you, have gone through abuse. And because you've gone through abuse, you carry it with you, and it becomes a part of you. And so I want to talk today from the heart, but I'm going to share with you statistics and science and things to hopefully help make sense of the material so that it can resonate with you a little bit. And I'll share a little bit of my story too, so that it's not all sciencey stuff. It actually hopefully resonates, and you can carry it with you as you leave this space. Okay, so what is trauma? I do a lot of education on trauma-informed care and trauma and its impacts. And so we work a lot in our center with trauma. We are a counseling center, we're also an education center. I'm not a counselor, I'm an educator. And so I travel around Saskatchewan and I teach people what trauma is. And it's amazing to me that people can understand what trauma looks like for somebody else. But when they are experiencing trauma, they have a really hard time recognizing it. Or maybe you're in a spot where you're starting to kind of think about maybe trauma is happening in your life, but it's hard to look at, and so you have a tendency to look away from it. So what is trauma? Trauma is anything that injures our souls, our bodies, and our minds. It's when situations are so terrible that they injure us. And those injuries are lifelong. Those injuries stay with us. And now it's our job to try to manage our life in the midst of being in trauma. So everyone has experienced trauma in their life. Everyone has. It's part of the human experience. So these are just some of the different ways that you can experience trauma. There's sexual abuse and assault, physical abuse and assault, emotional abuse or psychological maltreatment, neglect, serious accidents, illnesses, medical procedures, victims or witnesses of domestic violence, victims or witness to community violence. There's historical trauma, stuff that's told over and over and over again and becomes part of your story. There's bullying that happens, and bullying can happen in school, bullying can happen in work, bullying can happen in the community, bullying can happen in your family. There's natural and man-made disasters that you might go through. There's forced displacement, war, terrorism, political violence, military trauma, victims or witnesses to extreme personal or interpersonal violence, traumatic grief or separation, system-induced trauma, this is a big one, system-induced trauma and re-traumatization, and school violence. All of these are ways that we experience trauma in our life, and there's lots more. That's just a little bit. But everybody here will have experienced something like that. Life is designed to have us walk through these hardships And so everybody will have experienced some of this. Trauma awareness is what I want to talk about a little bit today. Trauma awareness, our actions and responses to circumstances of life are determined largely on the trauma that we've experienced. The way we respond to people, the way we show up in the world, the way we position ourselves, the way we answer questions, the relationships that we have, the decisions that we make, a lot of that is filtered through the trauma that we've experienced. And if you know that you're doing it, you can mitigate it. So you can combat those experiences if you know what you're doing. For instance, I was really bullied in junior high. And because of that, I developed this shyness where I was afraid of people. And I would do everything in my power to not interact with strangers. Now I come to a place like this, and I'm 49 years old, and now I'm looking out and I know 3 people. I know Garth, Garrett, because we talked on the phone, and he emailed me. I know Benita, and I know Anne. Where's Anne? But I've made some new friends since I got here. And now I know Ambrose, and he's funny. He talks a lot, and he has great stories and great jokes. But I am learning, because I know that my tendency is to try to become a wallflower and try to hide away, because I'm scared of people. And I know that that comes from my time in junior high, 40 years ago. I know that comes from then. And so I push myself to show up differently because of my experiences. What happens is our nervous system responds to our thoughts and our fears, the anxiety and the stress that we're under, and it's an indication of how well we're managing with our life. Our nervous system goes into a place like this where I don't know hardly anybody, and immediately I get put in this state of stress, and my nervous system responds and says, run away. This is a dangerous place. So it is important to understand when you have one of those emotional reactions where that might be coming from. Our nervous system is there to help us, to keep us safe, and that's what it's trying to do. Whenever we go through something difficult, some people will develop trauma, a traumatic response, and some people won't. There's 3 things that have to happen in order for you to develop a traumatic response. You have to feel unsafe, you have to feel a lack of control, and you have to feel like you are not heard, that no one is listening to you. So you can have a family of 4 go through a traumatic experience like a car accident or a house fire, and the parents are doing okay, but the kids are going to carry trauma with them for the rest of their lives. Because the parents are the adults, and so they're more in control. There's a sense of safety, even in danger. And when the police and the fire department shows up, everybody listens to them. Yep. The kids, who really listens to kids, right? So they feel like no one's listening to them, even if they have something to say. They're not in control, they don't know what's going on, and so they feel unsafe in a situation. They're more likely to develop a traumatic response. And so that's why you can go through something with a family member or a friend, and you start to feel a little triggered, and they don't. You start to develop a traumatic response to something, and they don't. It doesn't mean that you're wrong or they're wrong. You just have a different perspective because of these 3 things: control, safety, and voice. Now, if you're going through a really hard time and you don't want to develop a traumatic response, let's say there's a disaster, Let's say there's a car crash, let's say there's a house fire, let's say that there's abuse in your life. You don't want it to follow you for the rest of your life. You don't want to develop a traumatic response. Give yourself one or two of these things. Talk about it and give yourself voice. Make yourself feel like you're in control. Even with, I come into this space, I know nobody, I still have choices. Where would I like to sit? Who would I like to talk to? Where am I going to stand? Those are little choices I can give myself to calm my nervous system down and help me feel like I'm in control. When you go into your very first therapist appointment and you're nervous, the therapist might say, would you like to sit here or would you like to sit here? They're giving you a choice. Doesn't matter where you sit, but they're giving you that choice as a way of helping you to relax. Traumatic response, when you're having a traumatic response, is not just emotional. That's what we often think. We think when people are going through a hard time and they're having an emotional response, they're angry, or they're frustrated, or they're hurt, or they're crying because everything is welling up inside of them. And we're thinking, oh, that's just them, they're sensitive, they're overly emotional. But it's not just an emotional thing. When you're going through a traumatic response, it's far more than just emotional. There are some symptoms of this traumatic response, this psychological response that show up in our body. So there's this inability to relax or sleep because you're in fight or flight mode. You're in survival mode. So there's a hypervigilance. You gotta stay on guard to stay safe. You might be quick to anger. The anger is just below the surface. So if there's people in your life, or if you are quick to anger, your anger is like a hair trigger. It may be that you are suffering from a traumatic response to situations, and anger is your way to control the situation. Anger is usually something that comes out of fear, and it is meant to control. An inability to concentrate or learn. Because I experienced abuse when I was a child, I really suffered in school. I had no ability to concentrate and learn. I did not actually learn how to read until I was 10 or 11 years old. And I think I graduated grade 12 with like a grade 6 reading level. Because I just couldn't concentrate, and I couldn't remember anything, and I couldn't learn by reading. You know, there's comprehension. I couldn't learn it. I would read a paragraph over and over and over again, and it wouldn't stick in my head. And it was because my brain was constantly in stress, and I was constantly in survival mode. And so I couldn't learn, and I couldn't remember. Lots of times we're quick to put kids on ADHD drugs when they have a hard time concentrating, and we have to think maybe a little bit about whether or not they've gone through something hard, and maybe that's contributing to their response in school. We may have fear for family and friend safety. My mother-in-law, who is now passed on, I've been doing this job for a few years now, and she used to phone me when she knew I was driving. She'd phone me every half an hour to make sure I was okay. But I kept telling her I'm not supposed to answer the phone when I'm driving, and she didn't understand, because if I didn't answer the phone, she'd start phoning police stations and hospitals. She was convinced that I was going to die because I wasn't near her. And every time I went out of the city, she would fear for my safety. So that kind of fear is very common when you're having a traumatic response because of what you've gone through. And then feeling out of control and needing to control your environment. Who here, either themselves or you know somebody who likes to control everything, who likes to be in control? That can often be a traumatic response because they feel afraid of their environment. They make themselves be in control of everything. They tell themselves they have to control everybody and everything, and that's how they can stay safe. It's all about safety. When you go through trauma, it affects your body. So it raises the stress hormone that we call cortisol. And this can lead to chronic fear and anxiety. And again, it's not just emotional, right? This is something that happens inside our body. So cortisol is a natural hormone. We need it. We need a little bit of cortisol in our life. It helps get us up in the morning. It helps get us to finish that project at school or at work. It helps us make a decision. If there's a timeline, we feel a little bit of stress, cortisol rises and we can make a clear decision. It helps us. It's good. Too much cortisol, not so good. So cortisol puts us in this survival mode where we have to get things done, we have to go, and we are like in survival mode. Our whole body reacts to the cortisol. So as the cortisol is moving through our system, our body tries to get rid of it. It tries to process it out of our body. And in processing the cortisol, it uses up vital nutrients and minerals like potassium and magnesium and sodium. And it uses all of that up in an effort to flush the cortisol out of our body. But because now we're running low on these vital nutrients, our body doesn't function properly. So we're not able to sleep, we're not able to digest our food, we're not able to remember things, we're not able to fight off colds, we're not able to heal as well when we get injured because we're low on these vital minerals in our body. So if you're going through stress, eat a potato for the potassium. Potatoes are comfort foods because they give us potassium and they calm our systems down. And a banana, yes, bananas are high in potassium. Yeah, so add a banana with a little bit of yogurt to your breakfast in the morning. Get a little boost of potassium and a boost of probiotics. There's things that we can do that will help support our body when it's in stress. Magnesium comes from chocolate. So good dark chocolate, you know, chocolate is actually good for you. Almonds or avocados, those are really good, high in magnesium. There's things that you can do that will help your body move through stressful situations. You don't have to avoid them, you just got to support your body as you're going through them. When you have this high cortisol level, it can produce brain damage. Over time, as the minerals and the vitamins are being depleted from your body, the cortisol actually affects and changes your brain. It rewires your brain. And it can damage your brain. Now, my mother went through her entire life moving from an abusive situation to the loss of her mother at a very young age, the loss of her grandmother. She had then had an abusive stepmother, and it was just a terrible situation. And it was stressful, stressful, stressful work as she got older. And it was just so hard on her body. Now she struggles from dementia. And her dementia is not Alzheimer's. It's not, it's stress related. It's because her brain has been damaged by the constant cortisol and stress in her body. So when you're under that constant stress and you're not taking care of yourself by eating good and getting self-care, like these people all around the outskirts of this room are taking care of other people. That's self-care, the massages, the getting your hair done, the getting your nails done, the doing something for yourself that kind of rebuilds and feeds your soul. If you're not doing those things and you're constantly living in stress, your body will shut down the systems in your body that you don't need. Systems like your short-term memory, your digestive system, and your immune system. When you go through stressful situations and you're not taking care of it, have you ever known anybody who got bad news and threw up when they got the bad news? It's because their body instantly went into survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you might have to run away fast, and so you can't have things in your digestive system. So it gets rid of everything in the digestive system, it shuts down the digestive system, and then they have trouble eating afterwards. They're so stressed they can't eat, they're not hungry. It's because their digestive system's shut down because they're in so much stress. Your immune system gets shut down because you're in so much stress. When I was in university, single mom, 3 kids that were all toddlers, and I was in university, after every semester, I would get so sick. I would be sick the entire Christmas break. I'd be sick the entire Easter break. I was sick all the time. Because when I was in the semester, it was so stressful, my whole body shut down. And then I'd get sick after the stress was over. And for my mother, her short-term memory has been shut down for so long that we now have to work at rebuilding the neurons in her brain because there's so much brain damage from the stress. So if you don't want to have stress-related dementia when you're older, take care of yourself now. It's so important because this is not just emotional. Stress is not just something you got to go through and get through and it'll be done. This is something that highly affects your whole body. So some of the symptoms of trauma and anxiety are poor concentration, memory loss, trouble learning new things, trouble sleeping, anger outbursts, negativity, always looking for the negative things around you because that's how you feel, so that's what you see. Always on the lookout, that hypervigilance, depression. Oftentimes we're also quick to medicate depression, but sometimes depression is just grief, it's sadness, and sometimes depression is related to stress because you're going through something that is causing your body stress. And disassociation. You're so incredibly tired of people and pain and situations that are hard that you don't know what to do anymore and you don't want to do anything anymore, so you disassociate from everybody. You become a little bit of a hermit. I have a tendency to hermit. I have to force myself to get out, which is crazy because this is what I do for a living. I force myself constantly every day to get out, talk to people, develop new relationships, and do this work. Because it's so important to me that other people don't have to go through this. So the long-term effects of trauma and stress on the body are this PTSD, so it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Memory issues, difficulty trusting others. This unresolved trauma impacts your entire lives, okay? Remember, you make decisions every day that are filtered through the trauma you've experienced and the abuse you've lived through. All this unresolved trauma is making your decisions for you. And you will continue to make the same decisions, even if it's harmful decisions, because your brain does not know any other path. Your brain is there to keep you safe, and in your brain's thought processes, safety is the known, not the unknown. The unknown is scary. The known is safe. So even if you're in an abusive relationship, you may stay because it is the known, and the known is safe. You've heard that saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't? That's where this comes from. Your brain is there to keep you safe, and it will keep you doing the same things because that's what's known. Even if you leave a bad relationship, you may end up with somebody else in the same situation, another abusive relationship, because your brain wants to go towards things that are known. So I went through a very abusive first marriage, and when my husband, now my current husband, when we first met, I did not trust him. I did not want to have anything to do with him. I thought he was scary. Why was he scary? Because he was so incredibly different. He was kind. He was not at all, in every way, he was the exact opposite of my first husband. And because of that, he was scary to me. And in the 3.5 years we dated, I probably broke up with him 10 times. Because he was, I didn't trust him. And that really was very difficult for me to get past. It actually took my dad coming alongside me and saying, I know you don't trust him, you have a right not to trust him, but trust me, he's good for you. Then I was able to trust a little bit more. So it affects your entire lives. Everything that you do and everything that you say and all the decisions you're making is because you're filtering this through this trauma. And I want to remind everybody that verbal abuse is abuse. It's violence. It has been proven that our bodies react to verbal abuse in the same way as they do to physical abuse. There is no difference. Our brain hears the verbal abuse and we have a physical reaction. So remember that verbal abuse, when people are belittling you, when people are running you down, when people are trying to control you, all of these things have a physical manifestation in our body. It is not just an emotional thing that you can get over. The saying, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. Not true, actually. Verbal abuse can be very, very destructive. And it can do a number on our bodies and our minds. There is a link between interpersonal violence and suicide. So there's lots of effects, like violence has an effect on our bodies, on our relationships, on our lives, and there is a huge link between the violence you're experiencing in daily life, the violence that you've experienced in your past and haven't dealt with, and suicide. So survivors of abuse are at a higher risk of suicide. And Indigenous communities often face higher rates due to historical trauma. So there's more violence in some communities, and that leads to higher suicide rates in those communities. There's a direct correlation. There are, though, support networks and prevention programs that can save lives. And so there's a ton of resources in the community that you can access that will help you to navigate through this difficult time. And if you know someone who's navigating through a difficult time, you can walk alongside them, and you can't make them change, and you can't make them go to these helps and get help, but you can be the support system for them and say, I know what you're going through, and I'm here for you, and you can walk beside them. There is a graph that I have here on the screen that is the impact of abuse on mental health in communities, and it kind of goes through out of 100. Okay, so there's depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation. So out of 100 people who have experienced abuse in a community, you will have 10 of those people have suicidal ideation. You'll have 15 of those people have substance abuse. You'll have 20 of those people experiencing PTSD or PTSD-like symptoms. You'll have 25 of those people having anxiety issues, and you'll have 30 of those people experiencing depression. And sometimes one person can be experiencing all of those things, or a mixture of those things. There is also something to be said for intergenerational trauma and how it affects us. I want to bring up two things. It has been scientifically proven that intergenerational trauma is an epigenetic thing, which means it is passed down through our DNA. It's passed down through our genes. It is also passed down culturally in our communities through stories and lived experiences, but it can also be passed down through DNA. So sometimes I can experience things because my mother experienced them and passed them down to me. So she may have gone through abuse, and in her body, her DNA changed in order to adapt and survive that abuse. Then she conceived me, and I was born with my DNA knowing how to survive that abuse. They've studied this in survivors of war-torn countries when there is no food and there's a constant state of survival for years, and there's this starvation happening and famine happening across the land. The children of those people are more likely to have obesity because their genes are designed to survive a famine. They're more likely to experience trauma from the stress in their lives and the abuse of their parents' life because their genes are designed to survive it. And so it's passed down through the bloodlines. Have you ever heard that it's 7 generations? It's biblical, the old people talk about 7 generations, and it's also scientific. 7 generations of trauma can be passed down. But there's also such a thing as intergenerational resiliency. That can also be passed down. So when you know and learn something different and apply it to your life, it changes who you are, and you can pass that down to the next generations. There's things that will move your soul and make you different, and then you can pass that down to the next generations as well. I experienced this intergenerational resiliency the very first time I went to a powwow. My dad's family is First Nations, but we didn't know because his dad could pass as white. And in those days, the early 1900s, they chose to pass as white. And so they dropped their Indigenous heritage. And I didn't know, my dad didn't know, nobody knew, until somebody did the family tree. And then we realized that we had a little Indigenous heritage on my dad's side, which I thought was really cool. My daughter wanted to go to a powwow. I remember walking through the doors and hearing the drums, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was stopped in my tracks and completely emotionally overwhelmed. I started to cry, and I cried the entire time I was there. I was so incredibly overwhelmed and so grateful to be there, and it was this huge release of something I didn't know needed to be released. And that, to me, was not something that I had ever experienced before. That couldn't have come from me. To me, that came from the generations before me. That was passed down. And so intergenerational resiliency is also a thing. We focus so much on intergenerational trauma, but we need to remember that the changes we make today impact the next generation as well. They are impacted for positive as well as for negative. We want to be the cycle breakers when it comes to trauma, all kinds of trauma. So trauma that's passed down through generations, unresolved trauma that parents that can affect children's emotional development, and cultural reconnection and support systems that can stop this cycle. We need to be part of that stopping of the cycle, because it's a thing. And this is, even gathering here today and hearing all the speakers and looking at the PowerPoints and hearing the stories, all of this is part of breaking those cycles. Trauma awareness is our ability to move forward with life despite what we have gone through, despite this learned reaction that we have. We understand where it comes from so that when we have the reaction, we can still move forward. I can still I have very strong opinions on how I want my life to go. I want to make a difference with my life. I want to use what I've gone through to help other people. I want to push myself constantly so that I can help people survive and thrive, even though they've gone through abuse. And that's hard, but I can do it. It's deciding to push yourself even though you've gone through this trauma. Healing from trauma never stops. It's lifelong. Like I said, what I went through 40 years ago in junior high affects me to this day. Because my brain, our brains are designed to protect us, but our brains don't really understand time. So what we went through 20, 30, 40 years ago in our brains is right there today. We can pull it up and experience it as though it was happening today. And that's why when you have a traumatic reaction, it feels like it's happening to you all over again right now. Or when you picture a traumatic situation, it's like it happened yesterday, or like it's happening right now. That's because our brains are designed to protect us. And they will bring these memories forward, and we will relive them. It never goes away, but we can mitigate it, and we can work through it. And it doesn't have to control our lives. So trauma doesn't end when the violence stops. Even though you leave a traumatic situation, a violent situation, it doesn't end. I'll give you a little story here, okay? So my first marriage was very abusive. My husband and I decided to change the code on our door lock. So it's one of those door locks that doesn't need a key, it needs a code. We decided to change the code because in the entire time we've lived in that house, we've never changed it. So the people who lived there before us had a code to our house. And all our kids' friends had a code to our house. And everybody has a code to our house. So we decided to change the code. Now my husband, when he's working on something and he gets a little frustrated, and if you know him, he's so gentle and he's so kind. But when he's working on something, he gets a little frustrated. And me, having gone through abuse in my life, he gets a little frustrated and I'm like, scared and backing up and thinking, oh my God, what did I do? How can I help? Make it stop. And he's like, why are you reacting that way? And I'm like, why are you angry at me? And he's, I'm not angry at you, I'm just frustrated. I'm like, what did I do to make you frustrated? And he says, you didn't do anything, you're helping me. I'm frustrated at the door. But I had internalized it as him being frustrated at me. Even though I have been out of that bad marriage for 20 years. And I've gone through a ton of healing. I'm still having a reaction to somebody being frustrated. So it doesn't stop when the violence stops. And that's an important thing to understand. Many of us, survivors of abuse, have emotional, mental, and physical effects. And we need to recognize them and be kind to ourselves, because it's not our fault. We lived through something. It made us stronger. And now we have to learn to live with it. Healing is possible through community support, and this I want to emphasize. There are so many community supports, and healing is possible. You can learn so much about how to move forward with your life through community supports. There is individual healing that is available. There's therapy. There's traditional practices that just are like a soothing salve to the soul, like drumming. I love the drumming today. Thank you so much for the drumming today. It was so moving. There's community efforts that are happening in this community right now. Support groups, education, and safe places that you can go. People that you can talk to. There's intergenerational healing that's ongoing in this community. Cultural teachings, reconnecting with your identity. There's lots of things happening that are supportive of people who are coming out of and learning to live with the results of trauma and abuse. We need to honor resilience as we move forward. And how do we do that? We have to recognize that we are survivors of this life. It is not going to break us. We're survivors of it. Survivors are not broken. They are strong and they are resilient. We are not victims of our circumstances. We have survived our circumstances. And it has created us to be who we are. Healing happens in community, not in isolation. I have a tendency to want to isolate myself. But I know that I do better when I'm in community. I know that I do better when I'm around other people. Even though it is painful, I know that I do better when I tell my story. Because I'm expressing it and I'm getting it out and people can hear it and I can help them and they can help me. So it's important not to isolate ourselves. And if you know someone who's gone through a hard time and is isolating themselves, it's okay to gently insert yourself in their life and to be that positive influence friend. That does help. I have had those people do that for me. We all have a role in breaking cycles of violence and supporting each other. Every single one of us has a role to play in that. Our lives are purposeful. We went through these things for a purpose. None of it is accidental. I strongly believe that everything I went through has made me who I am today, and that I can use that to help other people. And so I want to encourage you, if you have gone through or are going through systematic violence, personal violence, violence in families or in the community or in friend groups, or you're experiencing any kind of abuse, know that you can survive this. And as a survivor, you can help other people survive. And our lives become purposeful when we use what we have to impact the lives of others. And what I have is the ability to survive. And so I want to use that to impact your lives. You also have the ability to survive because of what you've gone through. And you can use that to help other people. And the ripple will continue. And if everybody in this community does that, the changes would be so amazing. And the people that will be affected would be so amazing. Not because you're forcing change, but because you're loving them and supporting them through their own hard times. You're using your stories and your experiences to lift them up and to give them hope. It's all about hope.